YouTube.
Yeah,
So,
I was going to ask you about that. I forgot to ask you offline, but are you okay if I
yes,
upload it to YouTube and
yes,
share
as
it?
long as
Okay.
you commit to me, you'll send me the link.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I've had people ask me,
Absolutely.
I had one guy in England, he says, well, Curtis, it's going to be 3 a.m. and I don't know if I want, I don't know.
Yeah.
So they wanted me to check that. Yeah, if you just can put that onto YouTube, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
That
I
way
will.
people can follow up. And I've got maybe a 10-minute general opening, but if at any point, Bill, you want to say, wait, you triggered something, you're not going to butt her.
Oh, must have got a call.
There we go. A live guest. Again, I wouldn't bring up more than one at a time, but
Yeah.
I will make the same comment to them if I'm responding and they're triggered and say, "Wait, stop!" I don't. I know some people get terribly butthurt if they're interrupted. I don't. People, things shoot through their mind and they want to. Oh yeah, what about that? See, here's facts. Did you look up the word ultra crepidarian?
Yes, I did.
That's what fax is here. Fax, look up the word ultra crepidarian while you're waiting. That's a good label for you. But see, I don't blame people like Fax because they read something from Time Magazine or Quora or Wikipedia from 10 Ultra ULTRA Crep CREPIDARIAN Ultra crepidarian. Great word.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
but I don't
I'll show
blame
it
them
for
because
everybody
their
else
total
too.
knowledge base of what they're speaking from is some headline out of Time Magazine or Core or something 10 years ago, and so they just recite that as if it's fact. But
Yeah, I love this. I'm totally putting this in my diction. Expressing opinions on matters outside the scope of one's
Is
knowledge or expertise.
that perfect?
I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah. So I get it, facts. You read something, you believe it, but if you hang around facts, you're going to get an education. Um, and the other comment I have for him, I may have told you, Bill, is you're going to see this pop up throughout your thing. Oh, that's been debunked. That's been debunked. My first thought with these people is, look, if you know that this thing's been debunked, would you please write a letter right away to Fermi Labs, Bell Labs, JPL? Uh, Tell these labs that you know it's been debunked and they're wasting their funding and money and laboratory equipment studying this thing when you can tell them it's been debunked. Save them the money. Hurry. Send it right away before they spend any more money on this debunked artifact. I mean,
We've got an ultra crepidarian here who can tell you.
yeah, yeah, I'm an ultra crepidarian. I just think that's such a great word. I thought I knew all the language. It's just so good. Uh, anyway,
Yeah,
it's 7:01. Bill, it's your room. We'll start anytime you want to start.
yeah.
I have a
It's all
request
you.
of
Like you
you.
said, I'll kind of cut in if I want to like clarify something or something, but I'll try to keep that real limited and let you share and everything. If you have any questions for me, or if you
I
want
have
me
a
to read,
request of
if you
you as
want
a
me to
fellow
read something or
Christian
look something
brother.
up, just let me know. So,
Would you be kind enough to just lay down a short prayer before we start
oh, absolutely,
for guidance and
absolutely,
wisdom, perhaps?
absolutely. Father God, thank you so much for the opportunity to get together here uh, to fellowship and to learn more about you and the evidence that you've given us of your just loving kindness toward us. And we just pray that you be with everybody who is going to hear this, who is going to be tuned in, listening, who anybody and everybody who hears this, I pray that you just work on them, work their heart, and let your will be done in, through, and around them. Let this be something that can guide them a little more toward you. And we just pray that you give us wisdom and give Curtis wisdom as he speaks and presents this evidence. Please give him the ability to share everything in a way that is receptive that is clear and concise and is wise and is in line with your will. We love you so much, and we thank you so much for everything. In Jesus' mighty name I pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you. God bless you. That was very kind, Bill. I like to operate under those kind of conditions, so we say.
Amen.
Okay, the first thing I'm often asked is, as you know, if you're in this room, we're going to discuss evidence for the shroud. This is not theological. I have two parts to my being. I am a theist. I believe in my Savior, resurrected by grace through faith at the foot of the cross through Christ. But I have another half of my personality, which is my humanistic side, and that's my science side. And I'm very strong in my science side. I'm got just people will ask me what are my credentials. So I've learned this, Bill, a little bit just to cover some of these bases up front. And I may have to answer the question again as people come in. But I have college degrees, top degrees from biology and genetics, top university, and I am very well studied. I'm 67 years old. I'm very well studied across all of the sciences: physics, math, astronomy, statistics, geology. I'm medically trained, but I am not a doctor. But I have an extensive medical training, particularly as it comes to looking at studies and science and statistics. I happen to be Carnegie trained in public speaking. I've been twice elected to public office, small town, city council, vice mayor, but that's where my public speaking paid off. I've served on the county grand jury for a year term. I've served on criminal juries, so I'm very well versed, Bill, in how you deal with evidence. That's a whole nother subject. Evidence isn't any one thing. It's different pieces of evidence. Some is more demonstrative than others. So that's a whole nother subject. And just as an aside, so you can measure some sense of my personal success, I've been married 46 years to my high school sweetheart, with kids and grandkids that love to come over all the time, and they're very successful too. And with no braggadocio, just so you know, I just am one of the most fortunate people you're ever going to meet in terms of being successful in life in any way you want to measure success: personal, professional, etc. I mentor young people in life experience and financials. So I'm what you would have called in my. I've heard modern TikTokers call me a polymath, but I like the term Renaissance man better. It sounds more romantic. It's just as someone that's pretty well versed across the fields. And so I use that in different areas. About 15 years ago. Oh, and by the way, things pop in my mind. As we discussed the evidence for the shroud, it attracted my attention about 15 years ago, and I really started researching it, and I continue to stay with I get a study a week on my computer, peer-reviewed, the continuing data. But my theistic side, I'll admit, as a bias, but it has nothing to do with my studying of the shroud. The shroud stands on its own as an artifact. If for some reason it were proved, actually, I don't think that'll happen. As a matter of fact, it's going the other direction, that it suggests it's real. But if it were ever shown that it was not what it purported to be, wouldn't affect my faith one bit. I'd just simply stop talking about it as a subject of interest. So I am able to separate those. People can come up and say, oh, you're biased. Yeah, but I can look at the science side and the evidence very objectively, quite easily, without wrapping my belief in Christ into that. Also, there are many, many artifacts, Bill, throughout the ages that have been claimed. I still see them popping up that people claim they have, churches claim they have, the nails, the sandals, the crown of thorns, whatever artifacts they may claim to have. And I want to make a clear distinction of this artifact completely separate from all the rest for several reasons. One is there's no provenance to any of those other artifacts that we're going to talk about, that we have provenance here, a history of it and what happened to it and what it shows. There's been no studies of any of those artifacts whatsoever to show. So beyond them being a claim, which maybe, may not, I don't comment on that, but they are distinctly different. Anybody that comes up and says, oh, well, there's lots of artifacts up there, simply is unable to separate what we're going to talk about tonight in the breadth and depth of the provenance and science and data on this artifact, and all the rest are just also rams. And there is one other aspect of logic to this artifact. before Christ was crucified, Bill, anything that he possessed, sandals, it talked about the guards, a lot of gambling for his clothes, anything that existed prior to his resurrection would have had no significance. He was just to them, even to the disciples, he was just their leader being crucified. They ran for the tall grass after his death because they thought they were coming for him until they saw he was resurrected. Then that changed everything. But my point is, any artifact before that, his cloak, his sandals, anything, would have had no significance to them. You follow what I'm saying? Because the resurrection had not occurred yet. It would have just been another nothing. So there would have been really no reason in logic for anybody to have preserved or kept beyond just some sentimental reason. However, post-resurrection, once they see that shroud laid out in the linen cloth, now that has significance. Something has changed. Something has happened there that's miraculous. So that's also an explanation for the distinction between the shroud as an artifact and any other claims made by churches or people through literature that they have something. Does that make sense, Bill?
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick, before you go on, we got more people coming in, so I just want to let everybody know we will later on open it up to questions, bring one person up at a time, ask questions. We're gonna be very succinct. We're gonna keep it on point, and if you're gonna act a fool, I'm just gonna get you out of here. But so just so you know, you can request now if you want, but we're gonna let people up later on after Curtis gives his presentation. So
okay. Now I've got my computer open, which I usually don't want to discuss this. And when we discuss evidence in this particular case, now we'll get down to the nuts and bolts. There are about 8 different types of evidence as it pertains to this artifact. There's textile analysis, what they've done with the cloth itself and looked at, and go into that. There's the dating, which is probably the biggest. We'll spend some time on that, of what we know about the dating and what we don't know about the dating. There's the blood match, especially to the Sudarium of Oviedo, and I'll expand on what that is in a second. Hematology, iconography, forensic evidence, what the pathologists can tell us happened to the body based on the image on the shroud is remarkable. We'll open that up a little bit. Botanical evidence, plants, pollen, coin images that they've now discovered, leptons they call them, Roman leptons on the eyes, and mineralogy, the actual limestone that they found on his nose and on his knees, and the image itself, how it was created. So as we talk about evidence, I want to be clear, Bill, that we've got a plethora, a spectrum of different sciences that all come to bear on this question. It's not just one guy with a PhD writing a paper in his basement. It depends how specialized what each one will talk about the limestone and the calcium argonite, and another will talk about the pollen, and another will talk about the coins. So it's very diverse group of things. And that's what's interesting about evidence. When I've sat in jury rooms, you pick up a piece of evidence and you try to determine how dispositive is it? What does it tell you? For example, I might have a piece of evidence, an alibi from the guy's wife that says he was home that night. Well, that's an interesting piece of evidence, but then I've got a piece of evidence with video showing the guy in the store with his face holding the store up. Well, I'm going to put more evidence. They're not all equal, is what I'm trying to say. You have to look at each piece. Some of the evidence that we'll discuss is more dispositive, and some can be challenged, and people say, well, yeah, but there's another. Okay, that's fine. So it's a whole collection of things, and then ultimately, as you go through each piece of evidence in the jury room, you make a collective agreement that based on the totality of the evidence, this is what it's telling us, and you make a decision, a verdict, if you will, guilty or not guilty. But even OJ's jury listened to all of the evidence and the blood and the gloves and said not guilty. So, yeah, you can have things slap you in the face and still, no, I'm not going to go there. And so that's a personal decision. Nothing we're going to do tonight is intended to prove anything. At best, you'll hear me say that it's compelling. It's compelling. It's just, you'd have to almost overlook common sense to come to another conclusion, but that's your common sense and your judgment, and we're going to leave it at that with everybody's individual judgment when we leave. Fair enough?
Amen.
Okay. Now I've got different papers here. Let me start out with it's the most anecdotal piece of evidence as opposed to hard evidence. The Shroud's history, many people will point to the fact that when it was first revealed in the Turin chapel was in the 1300s when it first came on display. And that's the first, what they call public recognition, where the notes in the history say, we see it, it's there at the Shroud. But before that, it wasn't called the Shroud of Turin. It was only called that because it ended up in Turin, Italy. When the disciples first collected those burial cloths, they have, not in the gospel, these are extemporaneous records, that they folded it up and only showed the face. They folded the thing into about a 2-foot square and put a frame on it with a lacing, and they referred to it then as the Mandalion. And there are quite a number of historical records saying that they saw the Mandalion, they know where it went, it had an image of Christ's face, but it doesn't refer to the whole body because they didn't see that, and it would have been too hard to carry it opened up. And there's historical records of that Mandalion being moved throughout Europe. It went to Edessa, a city called Edessa, and it ended up there. It was placed in, Edessa was besieged by the Persian army. And so they placed the Mandalion in a wall for 500 years before it was, fortunately, it was very high up because the city had flooded a couple times. It's almost miraculous that this thing survived. And it was because it was so high up in the wall. The Knights Templar had a record of it called the Mandolin. Geoffrey de Charnay, one of the big shots, if you know the Knights Templar, had a hold of it for a time and moved it around. But what's interesting is that the record of where it went throughout Europe, from Edessa to Constantinople, up into Lower Europe, France, and then back down to where it ended up in Turin, that's an interesting historical record from another line of evidence. One of the things that the researchers did, we'll refer to what's called the STURP trials, Shroud of Turin trials that the Vatican allowed testing about a dozen scientists in 1978 to come in. You may remember that. You might be too young, but it was a big deal, and they were allowed 3 days to photograph the thing, do all kinds of tests that were not destructive to it. And one of the tests they did was they stuck tape on different places, Scotch tape. And that's standard protocol for people that are collecting evidence, whether it's geological minerals on the Shroud or, more importantly, pollen. There are criminal specialists in all big police departments that are specialists in pollen. And what they'll do at a crime scene is take tape samples off of a victim and analyze them under high intensity microscopy. And they can tell from the pollen to a large degree where that person was, especially if there's something unique. If he went to some kind of a park or something where that plant only grew, they can place that person often very close to the different places they had been based on the pollen. And that's a key line of evidence for a criminologist to know where that victim had been. And when they did that on the Shroud of Turin, and they pulled off plenty of pollen, they put their best pollen experts on it, Dr. Rise and others. And, you know, I was discussing this with one guy, and he said, well, isn't pollen blowing all through the air everywhere? It's surprisingly not. It's for certain types of plants, if you drew a map, I could draw a circle of about 100 miles in diameter. And the plant, if that's local to that area, that's as far as its pollen propagates. So if I see that pollen, I can put a dot on the map and say, it had to be in this area. And when they did that type of analysis with the pollens, long story short, they ended up with a series of dots across the map of Europe. And guess what, Bill? The dot trail matched exactly the historical trail.
The route,
No
yeah.
divergence,
That's
no
cool.
Asian pollens, no American. It was just the convergence of those two lines of evidence together. And that's another thing about evidence. When one piece alone, like the anecdotal trail we discussed, that's interesting. People can write anything. Yeah, but now you've got the pollen that's literally pinpointing it right to the locations that the historical record. That's very compelling. That it went where they said it went. These records are accurate. They know where it went. But one of the most interesting parts of the pollen analysis, let me open up. I've got a lot of files, so forgive me. I'm going to talk off the top of my head, but I also like to have a study open here that I can look at it and make sure I'm reflecting. One of the most interesting parts of the pollen that they found is some of it was, actually a fair amount of it was very endemic to Jerusalem. These plants only grew in Jerusalem, and it gets better. Some of the pollen they found came from a type of plant that only blossomed in March and April. That's the only time the pollen came out of the plant in Jerusalem. So what does that tell you? That artifact had to have been in Jerusalem in March or April. When was the crucifixion?
In March.
Okay, so again, you're just looking at evidence. It doesn't prove it. Okay, but that's very interesting that they can not only date the place, but the time, because they know these guys are plant experts. I'm trying to see if I can actually pull up the actual, forgive me for multitasking here, but I want to try to be as accurate as I can. Let's see here.
Yeah. Much appreciated.
But yeah, that's fascinating data to me.
Oh, yeah.
You can take two lines of evidence like that and have them correlate so well to where that artifact was claimed to have been and where the actual hard data shows it to have been. And so that argues, some people say, well, we know it's a fake because the dating, we'll go back to the dating, but it showed up in Europe at about 1300. Well, unless you're going to imagine that somebody that had the wherewithal to forge this, which still hasn't existed. By the way, there's $1 million on the table for anybody that can show us how that was made. It still hasn't been collected yet. But let's just assume it was a forger. He would have had to figure out how to go back 1,000 years and get pollen from Jerusalem when they didn't know what pollen was. You follow what I'm saying here? It begs incredulity that somebody could forge something without any knowledge. And we'll get into other areas that do that same thing. They could not have had knowledge
Like
of.
they would actually think like this would be significant, Like
They
they
didn't
had
even know
no
what pollen
concept of
was, let alone how to collect it from 1,000 years ago. Then also on the tape, they found something interesting. There were two types. Let me pull my other reference here down so I can speak to these correctly. There were two types. There's of limestone. I'm pretty good at geology, but I want to be as accurate as I can here. Okay. The most common is calcium carbonate, and that's a very common. Then there's a more rare type of calcium called travertine calcite. Both limestones, but the travertine is much rarer, and it's endemic to the Jerusalem burial sites. They can't prove it was the one that Christ, but all of the limestone around Jerusalem is the much more rare travertine calcite. And when they did the tape test, they not only found that it was travertine calcite, it's where they found it on the shroud. They found it on the bridge of the nose, and they found it on the knees. Now, let me ask you, why do you think, Bill, you would have limestone on a bridge of a nose and on the knees? What would come to common sense?
Well, I actually kind of know this because I've done some studying on it, but it was when they took him down and fell to the knees and fell face down, right?
And it wasn't anywhere else on the shroud. So what a great forger. He had to go get this calcium travertine from Jerusalem and figure out, I'm just going to put it on the nose and the knees. Okay, so we'll look at that. So that's another form of geological information on that.
Real quick, I want to just reiterate for people who are coming in, you're welcome to send in guest requests. We're going to take guests later on after he's done presenting everything. And we'll take one person at a time and ask questions and things. So.
Apostle says it's been debunked 25 years. I'm looking at a study dated 2015, and what's that, 7 years old? And another one dated, where's the date on this one? So, again, we've got these ultra-crepidarians.
Ultra-crepidarians creeping in.
Crepidarians. So this is much more recent science evidence. I don't see a date on this one. But so we've got the mineralogy. The forensic evidence is really fascinating. These are guys that are experts in dealing with criminology with bodies. We won't get too morbid, but this is what they do. When the pathologist looked at the marks from the flagrum, a flagrum is a Roman whipping tool with about 5 pieces of leather strips, and at the end they tied little metal barbells to rip the flesh out. Lovely people. And the image on the shroud has about 120 flagrum marks. They didn't miss a part on him. If you ever see an image of the body, the way it looks, it almost makes you cry. They just whipped him beyond belief. They didn't leave a square inch of his body unmarked with these little barbell marks. So the shroud image has these little barbell marks. All right, this is where it gets interesting. When a living body is divoted like that out of the flesh, what will happen is a clot will form, Bill, right in the center. And in forming that clot, the yellow part of your blood, the blood serum, will be forced out and create a little ring around the clot, right? This is standard. And if a pathologist sees that, he knows that that injury was inflicted pre-mortem, alive. Because if they're not alive, the clot doesn't form and the ring doesn't form. They examined all 120 marks, just to be thorough. They all showed, and by the way, you cannot see that serum with the naked eye. You can only see it with fluorescence imaging. You have to shine certain light frequencies to see the serum. It's not visible to the naked eye. They didn't know that was there until they started to do those kind of photography tests. And now they start seeing these little rings. So the pathologists say, oh, well, we know what that is every day. That means the guy was whipped while he was alive. And that's what happens. But mind you, you cannot see those rings. So a forger would have had to understand the pathology, paint the rings on that he can't see visibly, okay? Furthermore, the injury on the side from the lance, guess what? No serum. What does that tell you?
It was post-mortem.
Post-mortem. So you begin to look at the pathology reports and put it together with somebody trying to forge this thing. They can't even see the serum. They don't even know it's there. And yet they figured out how to do that. Okay, so that's what the pathologists can tell us. Furthermore, they can actually tell from the directions of the scourging that it looked like 3 different scourges were used. How's that? Just by the directionality of the marks, the experts look at that and say, it looks like we had 3 different scourges used by 3 different people, which is totally probable. They probably had multiple guys working him over. But it just amazes me, Bill, the level of information that you wouldn't think that item could ever tell us. And here it's revealing it to us. The more science we get, being able to look at it in ways that we couldn't 20 years ago, let alone a forger 1,000 years ago, it's beyond...
Things they would never think of centuries ago to forge, right?
It's beyond imagination. And now I want to touch on one other thing. It'll go into the heart of the dating issue. There's an item in a church in northern Spain called the Sudarium of Oviedo. You can Google it in an instant. Sudarium is a Latin word for face cloth. In John chapter 20, when it refers to the disciples going to the tomb, they specifically refer to the shroud and it's often translated, Bill, as a napkin. And it refers to it being folded, by the way, which is another significance. Maybe we talked about that. It means that I'm coming back. But so we know the sudarium existed. We know it was a face cloth, for those listening. When they removed somebody to where they were going to prepare him for burial, they would place this face cloth. And if they were on the cross, they actually did it while they were up on the cross. They placed the face cloth on, wrapped it around and tied it and held it on. So it was for modesty while they moved the body so you couldn't see the face. When they got to the place of preparation with the linen laid out and put the body on the linen, they would remove the face cloth. It was not Jewish custom to wrap the face cloth inside the shroud. They just didn't. It would have done its purpose. And the scripture specifically refers to it. The church in Oviedo, Italy they made the claim at about 600 AD. It became public display. There's public records of the Sudarium of Oviedo making the claim that this was the face cloth of Christ. But here's the important part, is the date. They made that claim just slightly, about 625, as I recall, AD, and they've had it forever since. Your research there will show you that in a heartbeat in the first paragraph or two. Okay, there'll be a reason that that's important. Okay, anybody can claim, by the way, I know I go off on tangents, Bill. If somebody made this as a forgery, there's only one reason people made forgeries of any artifacts, and that was to sell them. And you would have to ask yourself, why only one church and only one place has the Shroud of Turin and one place has the Sudarium? Why would a forger just make one? I mean, this isn't the internet age. I can sell one to France, I can sell one to Rome, I can sell one to Italy. They're never going to know. And yet only one of either of these items has ever been claimed or shown up throughout history. That's an interesting point. But the reason this Sudarium is important, do you see it there, Bill? I know I see you looking at your screen. Does it show a picture of it? It's about
look at on the screen here.
It's about a 15-inch cloth, but if you look at it, it's very smudgy. It's not an image like the Shroud of Turin is. What you see is it's very smudgy. Exactly. So you look at that at first and you say, what is that? It's just a bunch of blood stains and smudging. All right, well, this gets interesting. Okay, go ahead and take it down, Bill. Here's where what makes this so interesting. Is they've claimed that was the face cloth. What our scientists have done, and it does not, by the way, it does not have the image that's on the shroud because it was not on the body when he resurrected, right?
Right.
It was laying aside, so it would not carry the image. But what it does carry is a ton of blood staining. So what these guys did, these scientists, is they took high definition photography of the Sudarium. They took high definition photography of the shroud face. They sized one up or down until, have you ever seen where they take two pictures and put them over each other to try to see if they match? They sized them up and down till they got the right sizing. And when they overlaid them, they found over 70 points of confluence, because that Sudarium, even though it looks all smudgy, it's got microscopic specks and spots throughout it that just almost invisible to the eye. Bill, when they overlaid those, in a fingerprint, I believe you need about 12 points of confluence. I could be wrong. I'm not, maybe 10, 12, where that's enough for a guy to sit on the stand and say that came from the same finger. These had over 70 points of blood. If you ever see that, I actually saw it done on a show. It was stunning how there was like little droplet streaks and the size got bigger. And then you look at the shroud and it's got exactly the same streaking and sizing and shaping. And so you could put any pathologist on a stand, raise his hand, and he will tell you that whatever face was on the shroud, the Sudarium was on the same face. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts. That is not a scientific maybe. That's so conclusively done with 70 points of confluence that, Okay, so once you accept that as fact, now I'll go back to the fact that we know the Sudarium was present at 630 AD. Follow where I'm going here?
Yeah.
So if they came from the same thing, we cannot have a shroud dated by that carbon dating at the Sturp trial at 1200, 1300, made by a forger in the Middle Ages. It's physically impossible. It
Yep.
can't be there because we know. So the sudarium ties the dating back to a minimum of 600 AD.
614 or so.
Undeniable, not even debatable. So that's
Yeah.
why when these people come up and say, oh, it's a Middle Age forgery, they don't have a clue what this recent science tells us about how you take these facts and you just put them together and you make a conclusion that's undeniable that the shroud had to exist at a minimum of 600, because that's when we know the sudarium existed.
Hey, 1 second. Sorry. Somebody says the live is glitching. Is it
You're getting little dots, but I'm hearing you okay, and you're
okay?
hearing me okay.
Okay. I just want to make
But you
sure
are
everybody
getting the
else
little
is able to.
dots. I don't know what that means, Bill. Does that
Yeah.
mean you're not glitching to
Okay.
me? It's okay now. But
They
you
said
are
it's all
getting the
good
little
now. So.
dots doing the dot dance.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. What does that tell you? Your Wi-Fi's
Yeah, it's like kind of low. It's glitched out for a second, but they said it's good now. So
okay. You've been good. You've been good through to me.
okay.
Um, we know that the blood
I
type.
had a couple family members come home. They might be getting on the internet, so I might be doing some stuff. But cool. They said
Yeah,
it's good now. So.
Deborah, I've talked to you before, and stay with me here, Deborah. You're going to see that the confluence of evidence makes much more of a suggestion that someone died. Certainly is someone. So the other thing that we talked about, I'm going to kind of back up a little bit as things cross, Bill. When we talked about those divot marks and the serum, what that rules out, they used to think 20 years ago, perhaps this was made by heating a mandrel. A mandrel is a body shaped like cast, right? Not a real body. And then
Hmm.
pressing the cloth over, some clever forger figured out how to heat this thing up. Well, there's no question now the shroud was on a real body.
Yeah.
That's beyond, so that theory's been ruled out. So what you have to assume, if someone were to forge this, now we're getting into a rabbit hole, Bill, where somebody would have had to torture somebody, thrash them with the flagrum, right? Pierce their feet with nails, pierce their side after they're gone. Oh, and by the way, the crown of thorns, we can see on the shroud, unlike popular thinking in paintings, you know how you often see it as a wraith around the head, like a ring? That's not what the shroud shows. And if somebody had forged it, why wouldn't they have done that? Because that was all the paintings and all the current thinking. It's not, it's a full cap. So again, the forger went out of his lane to do something there.
Oh,
Furthermore, all of the paintings showed the nails in the hands. Pathologists will tell you without any uncertainty that you cannot hang someone. We don't want to get too morbid, but it won't work in the hands. It'll pull right out. There's nothing left in your fibers here. They went through the wrists, and we know that now historically, but they didn't know that when they painted all those paintings in the early Middle Ages and made all those icons in the churches with the hands. That's not what it was. It went through we know without a doubt, it went through the wrists. And the forger got it right. The shroud shows it right through the wrists. And so if you want to assume now that it was some type of a forgery, you have to know that somebody did all of these things to a person and then somehow figured out, still in a method we don't know, to get that image on there. But it was a real person that they did all this to. And now we get down to the real meat of the matter, the image itself. 20 years ago, they didn't know. Well, let's start with what they did know. At first, they thought it was a painting. There was a claim made in the 800s, 600s. Some Catholic priest claimed that he knew the forger and it was a painting. And people go, oh, well, see, this guy said, well, he had some real political axes to grind with the people that had there was other issues there. But we now know unequivocally what the image is. And that also says what it is not. It is not a painting. There is no paint on the fibrils. If you apply anything to a linen cloth, Bill, it will, God, wait, you got, it
oh,
will
good,
wick
sir.
into the fibers. You know, when you apply something, it wicks in. So any kind of material, paint, anything you apply to the fibers will wick in. We know that that image is 20 nanometers on top of the fibrils, right on the top layers. 20 nanometers or 200 nanometers is about the thickness of a soap bubble. So, and it's right on, if this is the fiber, it's only on the top. It doesn't penetrate the fibers. That rules out any kind of an application of anything
Right.
with viscosity.
Because it would have
You can't do
absorbed
that.
into the
It
fibers.
will
Or,
soak in, and that's not what they see. It's right on the top of the fibers, and they know what it is, and I'll tell you what it is in a second. The other thing they thought it was perhaps some kind of vapor effect from the decomposition of the body. That it's called the Milliard effect, and it was vapors. The problem with that is the same problem. The vapors would not limit themselves to the surface. They will
Mhm.
penetrate the fibers. So those kind of things in the last 10 years have been ruled out. What they now know is they know exactly what the image is. And I will tell you, when you heat any kind of an organic material, let's take sugar and put it in a frying pan, it's white. You start to heat it slowly. What's the first color it goes to?
Brown.
Even before that, it goes to yellow.
Oh, like yellow.
That's
Yeah. And then
okay.
it
Brown,
gets
you're right.
browner
You're
and
right.
browner.
I
Yeah.
was trying to trick you. It'll go through a slow
Yeah, you are.
gradation of color changes, eventually to brown and black. But the first color it hits is yellow. What's happening there is I won't go too far into the chemistry, but it's important. The carbon molecules in the sugar are breaking down and cross-linking. They're connecting. The heat does that. And that cross-linking reflects yellow light. And they know that the fibrils of the linen are actually caramelized to that depth that we talked about, a soap bubble depth. There is no material added. It is the fibers themselves that have changed their chemical properties to make that yellowing image. Okay? We know that.
Mhm.
Scientists, Bell Labs, so on. This isn't conjecture. There's only one thing that does that effect, and that's radiation, heat. That's it. You can't do it with chemicals. You can't do it with other techniques. They know what causes that. It's heat. They now know through testing that to do that level of heating and that shallow, if you heat something for long, it'll penetrate. It'll go into the fibers. So for it to be that shallow, they know that it had to be a very intense, very short blast of heat, radiation. The radiation part is even more interesting because at first they were looking at the fingers on the shroud and people noticed they seemed abnormally long. It's got to be a fake. Those fingers they just don't look natural. Well, what the pathologists now tell us is that what we're seeing is the bones inside the hand. We're furthermore seeing the teeth under the lips. The mouth is closed, but we can see the imagery, shadow imagery of the teeth. We can see some shadow imagery on the back of the shroud from his spine. It's an X-ray, pure and simple. Any guy that looks at that, that's an X-ray. To do X-rays, you need radiation at high intensity. If you take a bright enough light and put it up to your finger, I can see the bone through my finger. So X-rays doesn't necessarily mean X-ray frequency. It just means some kind of a light bright enough to shine through that. So there is no question anymore in the scientific community in the last 5 years that that image was created from a blast of high intensity, short duration radiation. Furthermore, the image itself is vertical. This was surprising to them. There were light experts that look at the shroud image and they can figure out, at first blush, you would think if the body blasted out in light, the rays would go out in all directions, Bill. I mean, that would be a logical.
Right.
Not what they found. They found it was entirely vertical, as if you scanned it on a plate scanner.
Like straight down.
Right up and down. That stunned them. And the best theory now, there's a couple of theories, is that when the body resurrected, the body disappeared in an instant from inside the shroud, and there was some residual radiation left. And the shroud, what it's going to do in the absence of the body, not only the absence of it, it's a vacuum in essence. There was something there, now they're not, it's going to collapse. And that collapse by gravity would account for the radiation that's inside that shroud being strictly vertically oriented. Does that make sense? That's strictly a theory. There's some aspects to that theory that makes predictions. There are other theories. They all involve radiation. Nothing's changed from what I said. But there's some other theories about how whether it was strictly ultraviolet light or also there's radiation. I've learned is not just light. There can be if atoms dissociate, there's protons and neutrons, and those themselves can create radiation. Neutron radiation, I've learned, penetrates everything. It bounced right through there off the tomb walls, if this is what causes it. Proton radiation, on the other hand, is very short and would account for the imagery on the cloth if it was created by proton radiation. But their best guess is the reason that it's vertical isn't that everything went up, it's that when he dissolved out of there and gone, the radiation residual, the cloth collapsed and that left an image vertically. That's one of the best theories.
I get you. Yeah.
But there are
I heard one researcher say like dematerialization, like it
disappeared.
dematerialized maybe like as a theory, yeah, like because it's not limited by the constraints of the physical realm anymore.
Now, the other aspect, and I'm going to go over and touch this dating, there are several reasons that have been given, and I can't sort them out yet. The studies will go on, but it is pointed out by these scientists that if neutron and proton radiation is involved, it will alter the N14 carbon 14 ratio and make something look much younger than it should. If that was part of the effect, that could be one of the answers to why the dating is not correct, because it was physically altered the ratio. I don't know if you know how C14, it's not, but it's a ratio. And if you overboost the carbon 14, it's going to make it look younger. Now going back
because they're measuring the half-life of it as it ages, it loses the half-life and the half-life and the half-life.
Theories.
So adding more to
the dating issue is that there are a couple of papers I've got that suggest that the part of the shroud they took the strip out of, they took about a 1-inch wide by 5-inch long strip. They cut it up into 3 parts for the labs, and they saved another inch for posterity and future tests. There's very good evidence that came off of a repaired edge of the shroud. They find cotton fibrils. The linen is all wool. As a matter of fact, it was Jewish law that the looms that they did those on had to be only wool, because they weren't allowed to mix wool with cotton. So they had certain looms that were pristine for wool only, and they can't find cotton anywhere else in the shroud. It's a very, very expensive piece of linen, very expensive piece of high quality linen with not a touch of cotton anywhere else in it, which suggests to the researchers that it was made for Jewish customs and yet in this one place where the strip was taken, it couldn't have been taken off a worse place. They found intertwining of linen with wool. And the first guy, it was actually an interesting story. A couple that were amateur syndenologists, not professionals like the guys going in hardcore study, they went and noticed that on that area where the cut was, the herringbone didn't look like it lined up perfectly. And they went back to the high resolution photography that was available, and they wrote a paper and showed that what they had done was a repair that was just phenomenal. Whoever did it was among the best in the world, which would make sense. If you're going to have that kind of artifact, you're going to get the best people to fix it. And they actually, as opposed to what you would think where you just sew on a repair bill, they actually took the fibrils at the edge of the repair, unwound them from the linen, took the fibrils from the repair, and then re-spun them together one by one meticulously. And like there's 155 per inch. And so that you end up with a repair that's virtually invisible to the eye. It was just spectacularly well done. So anyway, this couple wrote a paper that they identified this repair. And one of the researchers, I can't remember his name, he was so incensed, he was so angry that they could make this claim that he went back and looked at the data and the repair, and he wrote his own paper that said they were right, that they missed it. It was that good of a repair. And there's also some pigment on that repair strip, which is paint pigment, which is not on anywhere on the cloth. It wasn't the exact same color, so they used a certain kind of a brown dye to do the best they could to, and they did it well. It was remarkably well done. I have seen some other recent data that disputes that. So I'm just trying to be balanced. That has not been resolved, whether or not it was a repair. If it in fact was a repair, though, that too would account for the dating problem. If you're going to date a piece of cloth that was from the 1300s and mix it in with just a few fibers from the original, you're going to get dates 1200, 1300. Actually, the three labs were quite divergent. They should have been much closer. As you moved away from the center.
Yeah, they went like Arizona,
Yeah, Arizona, Oxford, and
Oxford, and
Arizona, Oxford,
Sweden, Zurich.
but it was very spatially oriented to the repair, to the strip. The farther you moved away from the center, the newer it got. It's just what they now know. I had a paper up here, is that the dating is totally up in the air. They have not resolved it. There's so many reasons that dating could be wrong. There have been some more recent tests done. One is called wide angle X-ray spectroscopy. They only needed threads to do that type of dating. There's some dispute whether you can use that method to date things. Others say you can. The interesting thing is the guy that wrote the paper dated it to about 300 BC to about 400 AD. It was quite a range, but it happened to be right over the center point of the millennia. Some people don't accept that particular type of dating method. And I'll even see the argument that after the gentleman published his peer-reviewed paper with that dating, the magazine retracted it about 3 months later. And so they say, oh, the paper was retracted. Well, if you dig a little deeper, what you find is that the guy that had the thread samples that he tested, he was one of the people that should have had samples. I mean, he didn't make them up. He was one of the people that were given thread samples, but because he could not prove that the thread samples that he ran his test on were the thread samples he was given, other than his word as a scientist. I mean, you've got your sample, Bill, you run your test and somebody comes back and says, yeah, how do I know you ran the sample? Well, I can't, you have to accept my word for that as a scientist, right? Unless somebody was standing there the whole time. It's called a chain of, he could not prove to the magazine's satisfaction that the samples he ran were the ones he was given, the ones he had beyond his integrity. And so the magazine withdrew the study. Okay, I accept that, but it isn't because it was wrong. It isn't because they found out you can't do this. That was the reason. So science is weird. You have to dig in a little deeper to see before somebody makes a claim. Oh, they went through that study. Well, yeah, because you have to have what's called chain of command. You have to be able to, like in criminal trials, you know how that works. The guy signs the thing and he signs the thing. And I don't know how you would have chain of command proof on anything, honestly, once you possessed it, other than your integrity. There's no way that you can show, I don't know how you resolve that. But the point is, that testing showed it right at the turn of the millennia. The Stirp trial carbon dating testing was a shit show, and none of the scientists today has any faith, zero. That's why they don't stop studying this, because, you know, and people will pop up here and say, oh, it was shown. They just are clueless how that dating was so poorly done. And then you add in the repair cloth theory, you add in the changing of the C14 balance, if in fact the resurrection occurred. There are other factors, and I can't resolve that tonight. The studies will be going, but what I can say, Bill, definitively is, of all of the areas we discussed geology, botany, those are all hard facts that we know. The Oviedo, the dating, everything we've discussed is hard facts. So I will say to somebody, let's take the dating and just put it on a shelf for right now. Just it doesn't say it is, doesn't say it is. Again, I think the Oviedo dating is pretty convincing. If the thing matched to 70 points, we can at least put it at 600. But I'll take
we can at least make it as old as the Oviedo.
It hasn't been resolved. But here's where we're going, and I'll wrap this up. You've been very gracious, Bill. The Vatican is reluctant to allow studies, anything that's like cutting a piece off of it. That ain't going to happen anymore. So what I think, and I'll predict for you, is going to happen as the science, because they have new ways of measuring, and they have these theories that we talked about, the atomic disintegration versus ultraviolet light. They all make predictions of what you will find on the cloth in terms of trace elements left behind. They make predictions. And so I'll predict you're going to see in the next 5 years, I'll say, is another consortium of scientific groups come together, 10, 15, 20 scientists, go to the Vatican with a proposal that we can test for these things, but none of them are destructive. Just give us another 3 days and we'll go in and shoot our beams and do what we have to do, and wide angle spectroscopy, whatever. And they will have very specific goals. It won't just be to go in, let's just study this randomly. They'll be looking for specific outcomes based on what these current theories predict. It will be hardcore science. And assuming they're allowed to do these tests, they will then refine those theories to very specific methodologies to say that we know it had to have been a blast of radiation, or we know it had to have been proton radiation, because our tests showed these residual compounds that were predicted by that type of a theory. And so you're going to get, in my opinion, Bill, more data, more studies, and they're not just for the sake of doing studies. These are to refine specific theories down to specific predictions and outcomes of what created that image. But we're so far past the point of forgery and middle-age dating. I mean, that's stuff from 30 years ago, that when you see these people make these comments, they're ultra-cryptidarians. They've read something, and that's what they hang their hat on. But I hope that what we've discussed so far, the Vatican has the shroud, I hope that what you've seen from the kind of dating and the sudarium and the blood and the pollen and where we know it went, and the totality of that evidence is just, and then I want to address one final thing. Grace, I've seen her before. She's an atheist. I respect her. But people could say, okay, well, let's say you're right about everything. It was a real person and they were crucified, and the nails and the crown of thorns. How does that prove it's Christ? Well, at some point you have to make a decision that if it dates it right to that turn of the millennia, right? And you have all of the Gospels, and I know people go out of the wood, well, the Gospels were written later, but they're a written story of what happened to a single man, right? And they're very specific to what happened to that man. I mean, down to the whipping, to the beating. By the way, there's massive bruises across his shoulders. I didn't mention that. Wonder what that came from. So what you do is you end up in a position where you've got the records telling you what happened to a man right at that point in time. Then you add in the miraculousness of the image itself. I use the word miraculous because we're not going to come up with a way. I mean, we may say this is what we think happened, but that's not something that's natural. People don't naturally turn into that. And so what I'm saying, Bill, is that even though somebody said, well, that just proves it was a guy that was crucified then and resurrected. Okay, but if everything matches the story and the history and what we're told, at what point do you say, you familiar with the term Occam's razor? The simplest,
yep. Or like the PSR,
the most obvious.
The principle of
Why would they take
sufficient
some
reasoning.
other guy do everything that matches what happened to the gospel with Christ right at that point in time, match every feature and aspect, and then say it's not Christ? I mean, you could do that. Remember when we started, I said, I can't prove anything to you. You have to make your own conclusions. But I would suggest to you, as any person of logic, you would say, what else fits that whole trajectory of science and timing and history? And again, I go back to my initial position was, all I can do is lead you to the edge of the water, show you all of the evidence, and you have to decide if you want to jump in or not. If you want to say, well, that still doesn't prove it. Okay, I'm not sure anything would prove it to you at that point. I mean, you're going to find OJ innocent no matter what. Okay, I can't.
Love that analogy.
So anyway, let me shut up for a while. That was a pretty comprehensive coverage of the different lines, the history, the biology, the morphology, the image. And now I'm ready to be quiet for a few minutes. And if you have questions or thoughts, or you want to turn somebody loose in the room, have at me. But does that
Yeah.
case kind of fit together coherently?
Oh, absolutely. I
See,
love it.
here
I
we go.
appreciate it. I'll
She's
share one thing real
another
quick. Just oh,
ultra-cryptidinarian.
sorry, what was that?
I'm sorry, I love it. See, remember I told you this happens. It's a hoax. It really shouldn't threaten anyone's faith.
Oh,
My faith doesn't depend on it. But I'd love to see what they have to show that it's a hoax. You know what they're going to say? Dating from
yeah,
Stirp trials. That's all they have. That is the only hook. That's it that you can even hang your hat on. There is no other piece of evidence to suggest it's a hoax. Quite the opposite. And as I said, I know I'm repeating myself, the dating has been so disproved and thrown out as erroneous that,
yeah.
but you know, I told you this was what's going to happen. I get it. I've been down this road before. But if anybody would like to come in, Bill, it's your room. Bring them up. I'll discuss it.
Absolutely. Real quick, I wanted to share one quick point. I shared it with you when you were on last week, but just for everybody else, like when they discovered the duck-billed platypus,
Yeah.
they when they first wrote back about it, like nobody believed them. They thought they were making things up. They they got more evidence. They got like a carcass, and they ended up sending it back, and they dissected it and analyzed it, and still many rejected it. They captured a live one, brought it back, and there were still people
Yeah.
that would not believe that it was
Somebody
actually a
glued that
real
duck
animal.
bill on that thing.
Yeah. And so there's some people that no matter what, they're going
You know,
to
I know
be a
this is off the
skeptic about
subject.
it.
There was just a case in the papers in Delaware where they had the guy on photography robbing the jewelry store, and
But
he beat the owner. They took him to trial. They played the photography. It was a hung jury, and they even had some of the jewelry store stuff on the guy. And people are just like, they'll try him again and they'll get him. But it just shows you that it just sometimes it doesn't matter what the evidence shows. What if people are dogmatic and stuck in their lane? It wouldn't believe it if they wrote Jesus across his forehead. It's not going to
yeah,
change. I get it. I'm with them, but I'm an evidence-based guy, Bill. That's
yeah.
the lane I'll stay in. So
Real quick,
bring
I
somebody
have
up
a
if you
quick
want.
question for you on like with the dating. Just kind of what's your opinion or take on whether or not they should do another radioactive carbon dating? Because
Okay,
the controversy with that is they have to destroy a
correct.
piece of
That
it.
will never happen
They
again.
have, and so do you
That will
think
not
that
happen.
it would be feasible to do that? It would be
No, you will not
no.
see any more C14 dating. That said, that does not mean we cannot date it. There are modern methods. I mentioned one of them, wide angle spectroscopy, X-ray, and there are several other methods that are not destructive that are being refined as we speak. And as those refinements come in, they're mostly based on image reflection, shining a type of a beam on and bouncing it off and looking at different things. But no, you will never see C14 dating in, nor should you, because C14 dating is notoriously inaccurate. They
Yeah,
have things, I mean, you can just Google C14 dating inaccuracies. They've dated live snails to 5,000 years old, and it goes on and on. But I'm not, surprisingly, when somebody says that dating was shown to be 95%, I won't dispute that perhaps the dating was accurate. If you're dating a piece of cloth that's been repaired, you follow what I'm saying?
hmm,
So I'm not one just to say automatically that the dating was inaccurate. It just may not have been on the actual cloth material. So there's a host of reasons that dating is considered. There's just not a reputable scientist that works on the shroud today that believes for a second that dating has any veracity at all. And again, I tie you back to the Sudarium of Oviedo. We know for a fact that item existed at 600, and it is intimately tied, perfectly tied to the shroud. And by the way, they're both AB blood type. And furthermore, what if we're able, at this point, we cannot do a DNA analysis on the blood. We're not sophisticated enough, but that may change as we go forward. And if at some point we're able to do DNA analysis on the blood of the shroud and the blood of the Sudarium, that will clinch it.
yeah,
They came from the same body, and that will date it to a minimum of 600 AD. And then you're going to add in some newer dating methods that will, in my prediction, Bill, date it right spot on to the turn of the millennia. And then what are they going to do with that information? Oh, well, that's interesting, but it's probably still a fake. Yeah, okay, I get it. So, but
Yes.
does that answer your question? You're not going to see any more
Yep.
carbon dating, nor do you want to. It just is a
Amen.
terrible method for that type of an artifact. Um,
Yeah.
got anybody that wants to come up? Oh, here we go. Who do we got here?
Yeah,
Background?
bro. So, hey, real quick, Michael, I was looking and looking for you. I was so confused. I was like typing your name, and I was like, I know that's his name, and I couldn't find it. And you changed your name on me, but
Yeah. Dude, I'm so excited. I didn't know that this was going to be tonight.
What do you
Oh,
think? Background?
uh, I don't know. I didn't know it was going to be tonight, so I didn't really have anything prepared. Like, while you were
That's okay.
speaking, I just wrote down like the 5 best questions that I could come up with.
Try me. Let's talk
Uh,
about them.
but first, what is your actual name? Is it Oakdale Curtis?
My name is Curtis, and I live in a little city called Oakdale. That's outside of Yosemite in California. And I hope no one in the room will hold it against me that I live in California.
I don't blame you. Um, so, first question, which area of research did you perform on it?
I am nothing but an assembler and reader of research. I do no research myself. I'm a studier of this. I get a peer-reviewed paper a week in my computer background, and I study it and I read it and I try to integrate it into my 15 years of studying the science that I've seen on it. But
Okay.
that said, I don't know if you heard my, I know you didn't. I know I'm repeating myself but I'm very much a man of science. My background is college degrees in top university in biology, genetics, and I'm what you would generally call a Renaissance man. Very well studied across many fields of science. I'm pretty good at science, I'll say that. So when I read these studies, I'm trained in statistics, mathematics, medically trained, not a doctor. I know how to read studies. I know how to look for their weak spots and their strengths, and I don't just buy something just because it's read. And a matter of fact, I don't know what part of the discussion you've heard. A number of times I've mentioned that some things could be this way and some things could be that way, and we just haven't resolved it yet. So I'm perfectly prepared to present both sides or conflicting sides of different issues. I'm not dogmatic that just says, well, this is the way it is. That's just not the way science works. So anyway, does that answer that question at all?
Yes.
Okay.
What was your opinion on the carbon-14 dating done on it?
Okay. We now know that there's a couple of things going on. There's some very good science and papers written that suggest that the part of the shroud near the edge that was trimmed off about a 1 inch by 5 inch strip was a repaired strip of cotton, not of linen. There is some other people that dispute that. Um, I'm pretty convinced it looks like a repaired strip, which would easily account for the fact that if you put a more modern strip of cloth on and you do your tests on that, then yeah, you're going to get a more modern date. The science on that is very compelling. There is also some more recent science that suggests that the image itself was made by a blast of radiation, and that radiation blast will alter the nitrogen carbon 14 ratio in itself. So if the scientists have said explicitly that will make it look younger if that radiation theory is correct. So I guess the answer is there is no current scientist that believes that the STIRP trial carbon dating is relevant to what the actual date of the fabric is. And there are a number of lines of evidence we discussed, from the Sudarium of Oviedo line of evidence to the wide angle X-ray scattering tests most recently that dated it right at the turn of the century. Other people don't think that's a valid type of a test. So as far as the dating, as I said with Bill, of all of the lines of evidence, that one line of evidence dating, I will put on the shelf and say not resolved yet.
Okay. The other thing is I don't remember the man's name, and I don't have the paper to quote him on.
That's okay.
But I do remember hearing one scientist claiming that they carbon dated a mammoth, and
Yep.
the bones carbon dated to around 22 million years old, and
Yes.
then Again, was it like 44 million? And he's like, that's a
If,
long
if,
burn.
if you Google carbon 14 dating, just comma errors, it's shocking the things that will come out. Carbon dating live snails to 5,000 years old. Carbon dating, but I don't want to dismiss it that easily. Carbon dating has its place if it's done properly on proper samples. I don't want to just imply that it's irrelevant because that's not really fair to carbon dating. It does have a place if the samples are handled correctly and the people doing it understand the limitations, but it clearly has tremendous room for error. In this case with the shroud, though, I don't think that it's an error. I think that they did date it correctly, but there's the big but. Either they're dating a sample that was much more modern and a repair on the edge was one of the two best theories, or the carbon nitrogen ratio was altered by the radiation burst itself. In either case, you're getting a correct reading on the carbon dating. I want to be clear, you're getting a correct answer from the machine. It just isn't telling you that's it isn't relevant to what the cloth itself is. I don't know if that was even more confusing than
There's too many factors at play to
correct.
just ultimately claim that it's one solid piece. Where
No current scientists believe that carbon dating has any relevancy to the truth of the shroud, whatever it is or it isn't. They just don't. So anybody that pops up here and says the shroud is a hoax, like Class Cheesy, I know they're hanging their hat on the carbon dating, and they couldn't be more off base from what the science is showing now. And again, Bill, I take you back to the Sudarium of Oviedo, the exact matching, 70 points of confluence, and there you've got an item dated at 600. So we can push it back there, right, which blows out the carbon dating just on its face. So
Yeah.
it was too far long ago for it to be a consistent piece. So,
okay, what was your next question, Under?
um, what are some of the unexplained occurrences in the shroud that some people have talked about?
Well, here's some interesting thing. That's a good question. In terms of when people want to say it's a hoax or a fraud, what you're saying there is that somebody made it. So we're talking that. I mean, that's what we're saying. Some human hand made it. Some of the anomalies that they found on the shroud that would argue against that. For example, were it to be made in the Middle Ages or any ages, the image on the shroud is nude. He does have his hands over his privates, but it is nude. If you had tried to sell a nude artifact of Christ at any point in the Middle Ages or back, you would have been killed. They would have thought that was blasphemy to produce any image of him. If you look at all the paintings, they have a loincloth around him. That would have been absolute blasphemy in that time and age to produce for a forger to think he could get away with producing a nude image. Secondly, the current thinking in the Middle Ages and back was that the the nails were put into the hands. If you look at all of the Catholic iconography, all of the paintings, they all show the nails in the hands. They now know, the pathologists today, that would never work. And in fact, more recent historicals have shown that the nails were placed in the wrists. That's the only way it will support the weight of a body. And so the forger would have had to produce something that was unknown in his time to put those in the wrist. Furthermore, they all presented the crown of thorns as a wreath around the head, a ring around the head, in all of the paintings, in all of the diagrams, all the descriptions. In fact, the Shroud of Turin shows it was an entire cap over the entire head, thorns all over. So that would have been out of the ordinary. So you're looking at a number of different things in that image that were out of the ordinary, that a forger would have not done if he was following the concepts and precepts of the time. And yet we now know that they're archaeologically and physiologically spot on accurate.
What about the blood spots in the shroud? I remember watching it. I don't remember if it was a documentary, but the blood did not seep completely through the fibers, just the surface of
No, interesting enough, I'm glad you brought this up because I didn't touch on it in our discussion. All of the blood stains that are on the shroud, Bill, are under, think about this, they are under the caramelization. Now, so they were laid down before the blast of
The
radiation
body.
or whatever created the image. Two problems with that. If you were a forger, what that would have mean is that, and we, by the way, we know it's AB blood, which is typical Jewish. It's uncommon in the Middle East, except for Jewish heritage. That aside, what that means with the blood under the image formation, the caramelization, Bill, is that a forger would have had to paint all of the blood stains onto the shroud without any knowledge of where the actual, there's no lines or sketching. You follow what I'm saying? You would have had to put all the specks, dots, everything at every spot correctly, and then somehow create the image over that. That's beyond imagination. What they think is that during the resurrection, their best theory is, because he's right, the blood is dried on that, is that, I know this may sound strange, I read it several times to make sure I understood it, that during that process of radiation, the blood was impacted by radiation pressure, it's called, off of the body onto the shroud. That accounts for it being dried, but not soaked into the mandrels, and it accounts for it being under the image itself. You know, I can't stress enough, Bill, how these scientists come up with these theories, but theories make predictions, and they make very detailed predictions, and they have two lines. If it was this, then you'll see this, this, and this, and if it was this, you'll see this, this, and they do their tests, and they see this, this, and this in this column, and they say, well, then that suggests it was radiation pressure pushing the blood off of the body in that moment of resurrection. It's just fascinating how they don't just guess at this stuff. They make predictions based on their astounding knowledge of how physics works, and then they look at the data encoded in the shroud and say, this is what it's showing us. And they pretty much dialed it into the prediction that I gave you of radiation pressure from proton and neutron radiation and the shroud collapsing. We talked about, and that would give the linear, that stunned them, because all the scientists up till then assumed that it had radiated radially. I mean, that would be your common sense.
Right, a burst of light outward, right?
Not what they, see, that's what's so amazing about this, is because they go into this with certain thinking and ideas, and then when they do the tests and the science, they find out it's not what they thought. And that reveals opens a whole nother door to an explanation of the shroud collapsing through the radiation would give that image a perfectly vertical alignment, which they see. So it's just fascinating how, as they dive into this, and this will continue, it's not going to stop. We talked about that. They'll make further tests and refine the tests, and the dating tests that we talk will refine those and come up with methods. And if I'm right, in the next 5 years, 10 years, the Vatican allows guys like that to go back in with a whole data set of theories, and they're looking for very specific results. They're not just going in blindly. Let's just test it. You're going to test for this type of radiation and that type of effect, and that will resolve the best probable explanation of what happened there. But none of that explanation, as far as I can see, involves anybody human on this earth doing anything. That was, in every sense of the word, a supernatural event. And I don't use the word supernatural, Bill, in a theistic sense, even though it is. I use it in the sense that we have no natural process on the planet that creates that type of radiation for that short of a burst, for that type of a blast. I mean, I'm talking not just Earth. I'm talking about looking at neutron stars, supernovas, astronomical effects. There is nothing on Earth or in the universe that we know of that creates that type of a momentary blast of that type of radiation. And at that point, what do you do? Everything matches the scripture. Everything matches the description. He resurrected through the cloth, bang, and the evidence is right there in front of our face to study the hell out of, study the heck out of if we want to, but it's telling us a story, and it's not a story that has any relationship to human beings doing anything. Try me again, background. I'm sorry I ran on you there.
Um, do people in the scientific community try to dispute its credibility today?
Yeah. Yes, for every study that I get, I'll see another study. I saw a study from a pathologist that it was an opinion study, but he looked at he hung models on crosses, and he was looking at the blood patterns, putting blood from the hands, because on the shroud there's a sawtooth pattern of the blood, and what they infer from that is that he was heaving. He's trying to breathe. You push up and you go down. You push up and you go down. I know that sounds brutal. It is. And this other pathologist tried to show that the patterns on the shroud didn't match. If he did this guy at a certain angle and this and that, it didn't look right to him. And I respect that kind of a study, but I don't put a lot of probative value in it. You remember we were talking about that, Bill? Because it's an opinion. It's based on we don't know the exact angle that depending on how high the footstool was, and we make inferences of whether it was this angle or this angle or this angle, and that will change the effect. So, but to answer your question bluntly, yes, for every piece of data, you will have other scientists that look at it and have another opinion. Most of the things we've described, though, Bill, they're not disputable. There is nobody writing that the 70 points of confluence didn't match on the Sudarium. There is nobody debating that that the serum rings are around all of the blood divots. So there's certain pieces of science that just aren't being disputed at all, and yet they're very, very probative and compelling as to what they're
Yeah.
saying.
And
So
real quick along that line, I didn't hear you mention it earlier, but just something that's really super interesting is that the Shroud it's become the most researched single artifact in history. Like
yes.
that artifact, we've researched it more than any other artifact that we
Now,
have.
Cheesy, I have a question for you. Cheesy's here saying the shroud is a hoax. Cheesy, if you know that that shroud is a hoax, would you please write a letter to Bell Labs, Fermi Labs, JPL, Los Alamos Labs? Write them a letter, Cheesy, and say, Cheesy knows that this is a hoax. You guys are wasting your money. You're wasting resources. You're wasting science time that can be spent on something because I know it's a hoax. Would you please let them know that, Cheesy?
Do you have another question, Michael?
Um, First of all, he was talking about the crucifixion.
Mhm.
Breathing in itself would have been horrible because
Yes.
with the placement of the nails and the wrist, it's right on the tendon and the nerve, and you're
Yep.
forced to use your back
Mhm.
muscles to breathe.
Which
Yeah.
is why the
And
thumb
all
is
your
folded
weight would be
over.
pulling you forward.
If you look at the shroud, Bill, the thumb is not seen. It's now they've seen it below the hand. Remember the X-ray effect? It's a dark area. And the
Mhm.
pathologist told us that's exactly what happens when you put a nail through the ulnar nerve. The thumb will retract and fold over.
And
Basic science.
here's
But you're
something.
right. The background, the breathing would have probably been what did him in. You suffer from asphyxia when you just can't lift your. It's brutal.
Yeah, once you run out of energy to lift yourself up to breathe. Yeah.
From my understanding, is he was alternating between using his back muscles and putting the weight on his wrists and the weight on his feet.
We can only speculate. I don't think scripture speaks to it, but the pathologist could tell you that's would make sense.
But to think that he endured that for
Brutal,
3 hours only to
brutal.
die of a heart attack, because
Yep,
what is it, pulmonary edema that
yep,
causes the fluid buildup in the
yep.
chest cavity, and when the Roman soldier stabbed him, he
You
started
got it.
bleeding, and then it was just fluid at that point.
You're
But
absolutely correct. Your pathology is accurate.
with
It
my
also causes all of the red blood cells to rupture and they release their bilirubin, which is one of the reasons it's speculated that the blood is still much redder on the shroud than it should be. It should have darkened to a dark brown. And scientists that study the shroud are surprised by the redness of the blood. There are a couple of theories on that, Bill. One is that when the body's traumatized, the bilirubin, the cells break open. But there's another theory that going back to that proton neutron radiation blast, that will affect the coloring itself too. So there's a couple of things that they think may have caused that, but it is certainly much more red than you would anticipate, uh, just based on normal circumstances.
And a statement to lead into the next question. Do you remember in the New Testament, in the crucifixion, where it said that towards the end, Jesus said, my God, why hast thou forsaken
Yes,
me?
yes,
Or Elam, Elam.
yes.
Um, I learned that he was not crying out to God, like, why would you do this to me? Apparently, part of the prophecy, he was trying to quote Psalms 22 on his deathbed.
Okay.
In which case, was any of the scientists, I don't know how you would try to test for this, but have any of the scientists have had the brightest idea to test the mouth area for traces of vinegar or any forms of acidity?
Yeah, I don't think there's some fluid that they think was vinegar from the imaging. The fluorescent imaging suggests that there was some fluid by his mouth, which they speculate is vinegar. I've not read any hard tests that show, but there is a suggestion of a foreign fluid there that they believe is the vinegar. And one further thing, Bill, the pathologists tell us that the imagery on the shroud is so precise around certain areas, the nostrils and whatnot, that they can see decomposition. If it occurred, they could have seen it. They're telling us, the pathologists, that they see no sign of decomposition on the body in the shroud. And they say decomposition starts after 36 hours. So their statement is flat out, that body was not in that shroud for more than 36 hours, or it would have shown signs of decomposition that they're aware of as pathologists. And again, do with that what you want.
Fulfilling prophecy, he would see no corruption. Anyway, so
That was the last one that I thought of. I wish I could have thought of more because this is really interesting.
They'll all come to you after you check out.
if you want, I can let you hang out up here, Michael. I'll bring some
Yeah,
other people up,
I'm
and if you
okay
think
with
of
another
something,
guest. Michael's not being I mean, I don't want to get multi,
yeah,
but
he's
he's
a friend
fine.
of mine, and
Bill, if
he's
you want to
really
bring up
really
another
interested in this,
person and Michael can,
and
come back in with questions. Stay here, Mike. You don't have to leave. Sometimes I get people, Michael, that are very bombastic. They just want to yell and curse and call me names, and I'm past that.
Nope, I'm a scholar. I want to
No, I
learn.
can tell. So you're fine, and I rescind my request for single guests on that basis, Bill. So go ahead and bring up another. Let's see what they want to try.
yeah, this is another friend. What's up, Warhawk?
Warhawk.
What's up?
Hey, well, right.
I just wanted to say hi to all the heretics up here. No, I'm kidding. No. I just really wanted to say thank you. It's been a blessing and a treat to have you here, and
I appreciate
I
that.
really appreciate that Bill has the opportunity to bring people like this up. And just a real quick
Means a
statement,
lot.
and I'm going to drop down. Um, you can always tell when the Holy Spirit is moving because Satan hates it, and his minions come running in. You know, you would think
I
these people would have something better to do with their life than to come in and try to ruin somebody's education for the Lord. You
kindly
know.
the Shroud of Turin. Yeah, you've got it. I've seen some real demons. I'm not saying all disagreement people are, Bill, but trust me, I've seen it. It pulls some of them out of the woodwork. They can't deal with the idea that humans might recognize their savior's left us his picture on a cloth there, and they have to do anything they can to refute, dispute, or deny even the possibility of that happening. So.
Yeah,
Yeah, it can be crazy sometimes. But I really appreciate those comments, Warhawk. Did you
You
have
bet.
any questions or thoughts on the shroud
Well,
yourself based on
I've
what
been
you heard?
watching the digs and everything about the Turin since probably 2016, 17.
Okay.
And now I'm working on the location they're digging there at the tabernacle where they think the Ark of the Covenant, blah, you know what I'm trying to say, was sitting. Um, so I'm all about it. You know, anything that they can show more proof, and more proof is
Well,
perfect.
can I dive in with a comment, Warhawk? You kind of triggered me on something here a little bit. And I normally don't get to this unless somebody brings it up. You didn't bring it up, but you're close enough that it makes me warrant a comment. There are people, one of them you may have heard of named Ron Wyatt, and these people are not scientists. They are writers that write stories, and they have no scientific background or ability whatsoever, and they make up wild claims about finding this or the blood drip through the cracks. I mean, I've read all this nonsense, and
Right.
it's sad because I see Christians somewhat duped in the sense they read the story and it sounds good, and yeah, I'd like to believe that, but they really don't have the wherewithal to research this guy or know where he's coming from. And then I hear them recite these stories, and I have to put them in the category of nonsense, and it breaks my heart a little bit because it muddies the water for people like me or other scientists that are truly trying to do hard science on legitimate artifacts. And then you get a guy come along and just start making these wild claims that he found the blood with 23 chromosomes. That's just nuts. And then when people that are smart enough to dissect that, then they try to paint scientists like me and other people that are doing good research and peer reviewed on these things with that brush. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly what's going on in chat right
it's
now.
like
So,
weird. So I just implore you to be cautious when you
oh
read
yeah, I use
claims.
discernment. I use discernment, just like the search for the
Exactly.
Messiah.
And
That
if it's got
show.
RW on it, and you can research him yourself. You don't have to believe me.
Right.
But he is not in the category of any of the kind of people that I would refer, relate, study, use as resources, myself included. And it kind of breaks my heart because it really gives fuel to the naysayers, the ones that know that he's a fraud and whatnot, and then they throw that up in your face and say, "Well, see, you're just like the." You know,
Yeah.
get away from
Well,
me.
again,
You know,
I appreciate
I
it,
don't
and
want him near me, and I don't want my fellows and brothers and sisters buying into that stuff. And yeah, it just is not helping the cause in any way. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to
yeah,
get
I agree with you. I agree with you. The more studies and facts that we can bring out of these things is what's best for humanity altogether. So,
yeah,
but I appreciate you guys, and I just wanted to boost you up there a little bit with some comments. So,
I appreciate it.
Appreciate you,
Warhawk.
Warhawk. God bless you, man.
Just stay
right.
open-minded. You'll see more stuff on the Shroud come out, and my guess is it's going to be stunning as we go forward, even more so than we have now.
I'm sorry. I came up with another one.
36 hours. Did I say 36 hours, Chris? I misspoke. 3 days. I misspoke. The pathologists tell us that after 3 days, a body will start to show signs of decomposition around the nostrils and ears and other places they can see on the shroud. And if I said 36 hours, I'm getting tired, Chris, and I retract that. It's 3 days. And that's when decomposition sets in. And interestingly enough, there is no sign, according to the best pathologists, of any decomposition on the shroud body, which tells them that whoever was in there wasn't in there for longer than 3 days, which coincidentally matches the story. I know. You know. Anybody else want to come up and have
There's
a
nobody
chat?
on the
Ask me
request. I
some
think Michael
questions.
had
I don't
another
mind. I
question.
enjoy it.
Yeah, I've
Good
got another.
questions.
Was a sample of the blood taken where more information could have been discovered other than just the blood type?
No, at this point in the science, and the best I've seen, we have not been able to do DNA studies on that sample. That may change as our DNA technology gets better, but currently, as we speak, the best we've been able to do is see AB antigens on the studies, which suggests that it was AB blood. They actually can't even prove, interesting enough, that it's human blood. It has many of the markers of human blood, but it also could be primate blood. The only problem with that is if you're going to go to the trouble of making up a forgery and doing all this, why in the world would you use primate? But why not? You've already got a dead guy, so it just. But I want to be candid. At this point, they can say that it has AB antigens and it has all the characteristics of human blood, but those characteristics are not enough to rule out that it could be primate blood. But nobody that studied the blood thinks it's primate blood. It doesn't. That just doesn't make any logical sense to the entirety of it. So that's where they're at. But I think we're going to improve on the DNA testing, and the day may come. I was mentioning this to Bill, where we can not only we'll be able to do the DNA testing, we'll be able to match it to the Sudarian shroud and Sudarian cloth and show that definitively they were from the same body. And it may reveal some other interesting things that we can't even predict in terms of the uniqueness of the DNA. I don't want to make any speculation there, but nothing would surprise me as we move forward on this thing, that we continue to find more incredible insights to things that we didn't even guess before we studied it.
Just imagine if we can get an entire genealogy report from that small sample.
Yeah. Yeah. Hello, Donna. Do we have a
Hey,
lady?
Donna.
Hey,
Lady on deck. Clean up our
I
ice.
came in late. I forgot all about it. I am
No,
so
that's all right,
upset.
man.
Okay,
But
you're scared.
it
No, just kidding.
it shows his face structure, doesn't it? Like how he
Very
looks.
detailed. Yeah.
Okay,
Matter
and
of
then
fact, you
does it
can go
show how
online
tall
and
he is?
people have converted it through AI into what he actually looks like. So you can go see who you're going to meet in heaven, assuming you make it there. I make that assumption,
Oh,
but yeah,
I'll be there.
they can tell you exactly what he looks like now.
And does it say how tall he was?
No, the shroud suggests that he's about 5'7", but that's
Yep,
plus or
because that's
minus
what they
probably
say
an
his
inch.
heights probably should be like. Yep.
It's difficult to tell from the way the shroud was laid over to an exact. The best science suggests he was about 5'7", plus or minus an inch.
Okay.
And the scripture, I think, refers to him. I'm not a theologian, Bill, but I think it refers somewhere to Christ was not remarkable of appearance.
Yeah, it
That's
was
No.
Isaiah 53
beautiful.
or 52, I think, where it says
Yeah,
that
it
there's
doesn't mean he
nothing
was holy,
comely,
but he was
nothing
normal.
about his appearance that would
Right.
draw us
He
to
was
him. Yeah,
normal looking. And if you look at the image of the face of the
he wasn't
shroud,
tall, dark, and handsome or anything like that.
right. He's not
He
the
might
white,
have been medium sized and dark, but
definitely Middle
maybe not
Eastern.
handsome.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
not the white Jesus we saw when we were growing up in Sunday school. Very much Middle Eastern, Jewish man, as you would expect.
But some Middle Eastern people are light skinned.
Yes, no, I'm not saying that can't be. And we can't actually tell from the
Because,
shroud.
like the Berber tribe, they're
Yes,
light skinned.
you cannot tell from the shroud image the tone of the shade of the skin. That does
Oh,
not
no.
appear.
I'm
All
sure
you
you
can do
couldn't.
is infer it from the way the hair and the general and the nose and the facial features all suggest a very Middle Eastern Jewish typical look,
Mm-hmm.
which would be an olive skin, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah. No,
So
he
he wasn't
wasn't
black.
black.
Well, no, that doesn't. The shroud doesn't suggest he was black.
Because his
Yeah,
hair would have been real kinky.
yeah, you can tell from the shroud. You can see his hair. It's not afro kinky, but it's not. It's somewhat
It's
smooth
curly.
with a little bit of wave in it.
Yeah.
You see there.
Oh, this is so cool. I hope it's real.
Well, and
It
as I
would
started
it
out
would
with
just
Bill,
get me all giddy.
Donna, I presume you're a Christian and a
Oh, heck
believer.
yeah.
But as I started out with Bill, I know you just came in. I am a follower of Christ, but my
Yeah.
faith, Donna, does not depend one bit on whether that artifact is real or not. I
Oh,
happen
I
to think
know.
it is,
Yep.
but if it were ever shown not to be, I'd simply stop talking about it. I don't think that's going to happen. But my faith is independent and has been
Right.
prior to that. So I just want to be clear on that. I would hate to see a Christian hang their faith on an artifact.
Oh, no. But it just would be neat
Yeah,
that it
no, it would be.
really was
Would be.
him.
And what if they
Yeah.
are, Bill? Just let's play what if. I don't do that often, Bill, but what if, as we go forward, the science becomes more and more compelling? For example, it's dated correctly. Let's say there's something unusual about a DNA test that's truly unique in the way the chromosomes are put together. Just a confluence of more data. It's dated correctly to there. By the way, I didn't mention in my talk of the evidence. They've now found on the shroud, it's very hard to see, but with their high resolution photographs, they've now determined that there were leptons on the eyes. And that in itself, remember we were talking about unusual things, like that in itself would be unusual because that would not have been a normal Jewish practice. But it's possible that one of the people they're burying who did it, they're in a Roman culture too.
Now,
So
what are leptons?
they're coins. That's a fancy word
Oh,
for it. Roman coin, and they can
Okay.
look at they can see they're very hard to see in the normal picture. They didn't know they were there until they really got some high resolution photography and some three-dimensional imaging. But they can see enough of the writing on the coin bill to determine that they were minted in Pontius Pilate's term from about 25 AD to about 35 AD. That was the only time they were
Oh,
minted. So again, what does that tell you? A forger's going
Limiting
to go back
factor. Yep.
and get the coins,
yeah.
and but somebody else will say, yeah, but he was Jewish. Jewish people didn't put coins on the eyes. So there's interesting aspects to that whole thing. You know, the crown of thorns not being the wreath. That don't you can't just point to Jewish customs alone and say, well, then that means it's a fake because they have leptons. No, that just means somebody there in the burial group may have had enough of a Roman heritage to say, I'm going to do this as a Roman, even though, you know, they're trying to bury him in a hurry on a Friday night.
I
So
bet you it was one of the guards.
you just can't make an assumption based on cultural history. We can use that as a guide, but some of the things about the shroud are truly unique in what they thought they would do versus what they actually did. But yeah, the leptons are a stunning discovery, and again, they date it right. You couldn't have been more dated on a 10-year period of production, right in the heart of where he
Wow.
was buried. So, you know, that's why they take that dating thing, Bill, and just there's so many other lines that show us that's crazy.
You can leave the dating out and put everything together in a cumulative case, and it would still be a very strong case.
Oh,
Yeah.
Right.
stunningly
But I
strong.
like
I'll
the
tell you what,
idea of what you
if
said
I were
about,
presented with this evidence going back to my history as a grand juror and a criminal juror, there would be no doubt about my verdict. And it has nothing to do with my bias. I mean, just zero to do with my bias. The evidence is overwhelming that that is exactly what it purports to be at exactly the time, with exactly the injuries, with exactly the history. I mean, I don't know
well,
how much
also,
evidence you
also
need.
too, with the amount of energy you said that
Yes.
the body emanated was beyond natural.
The physicists, Donna, say that it's more energy output than we produce in the United States at any given
Yeah,
moment. That's the kind of energy you're talking about. It's
that's
stunning.
divine
There's no
energy.
natural phenomena
Mm-hmm.
that has any relationship to what the physicists tell us happened inside that cloth. I don't know. Do with
Wow.
that what you want. I don't know.
I'm getting chills up and down my body.
Well, I think the beautiful thing about it is that he left us his picture.
Yes.
Yes.
At the end of the day, I
So
think that's the most
where
beautiful
do
thing
I go
about it.
to find, do I just look up the shroud?
Yeah, just look up Shroud. For anybody
Okay.
that's interested, all of the peer-reviewed papers are collated on a website called shroud.com, and it's just pages and pages and pages of peer-reviewed papers and dates and what they're about, and it's stunning. But they collated them all on one website there, so if people want to do
I
that
don't
kind
know
of
if you were
thing.
here earlier, Donna, when I mentioned it, but the shroud has become the most researched artifact in history. So there's so
Oh
much
yeah.
research on it. So, yeah.
It's fun. Oh, and I'll tell you one more thing, Bill. There are a handful of scientists, starting with you know, when I refer to the STIRP trial, that's the 78 trials when they let the scientists go in to do the initial studies at the Vatican. The photographer for that was a Jewish guy named Barry Schwartz. And at first he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to be involved. He didn't think it was had any, but they roped him into it. And he was a photographer by profession and helped them do the high intensity photography, a Jewish man. And it took him 19 years of studying the shroud, but he's now converted to be a Christian and is an apologist and speaks on the shroud.
I
And he's
heard
not
about
alone.
that.
There are quite a few scientists that were agnostic or atheists and just went into it as a scientist should, you know, open-minded, but the more they delved into the kind of things that you and I have hit on tonight, the more it becomes more and more self-evident to them, and they have since converted to Christianity
Yep.
and become apologists for what
Yeah.
that cloth
I
represents.
want to
So it
back
does
something
have
up.
that power to be able to change people's minds that are very science-oriented. Who do we have in here every
Every day.
day?
I want to back something up real quick. Now, I forgot what you just said about the eyelids, the Roman coin. The
Yep,
high
lepton.
priest. the Lapta and Lepton,
Leptons.
the high priest Caiaphas,
Mm-hmm.
that is mentioned in the Bible. They
Yep.
found his tomb, or what was believed to be his tomb. They found two
Yep.
crucifix nails, and they found a skull with those coins inside the skull.
That would make sense because it was
So
at the right time. That's the coins they would have used.
right. So I just wanted to bring that up just because, their shroud, but also they found at least Caiaphas, who
Right.
was a high priest,
There's
and
nothing in archaeology that has contradicted anything that we've said tonight. And Bill, I want you to ask me a
exactly.
question. Why do I
What's
do
that?
this?
What was that?
I want you to ask me a question. Why do I do this?
Curtis, why do you do this?
That is a good question, Bill. I'm glad you've asked it. Two reasons. One is it intrigues the hell out of my scientific side, as you can tell, just the discussion of, but there's a more important reason to me. My boss, the Jewish carpenter that I relate to, tells me to spread the good news. And I'm not a theologian. I'm not really good at, I've read the Bible. I believe it. I'm a red letter guy mostly, but I can't get into these rooms and debate theology with these people, preterists or before he's salvation. I don't care. It's not relevant to me. I put my faith on the resurrection right there. End of story. But what I've seen is that artifact, let me put it this way, many of the people I see on TikTok and in my life that are agnostic or theist or atheistic are also coincidentally super science oriented. And that's part of their problem. They're so science oriented, they don't acknowledge their spiritual side like I did initially. They just are locked into that science side. And my boss has told me that if I bring this information forward from a science point of view, as we have, you didn't hear me talk one word of theology, not my specialty, but the science, drill down on that to the depth and level of the science. If I reach one person, and let me be clear, I don't take any credit. If there's any conversion to be made, it's my boss doing it. But if
Yeah.
I reach one person, Bill, in this room that is a science-oriented theist or excuse me, atheist or agnostic, they're not sure, but they hear enough to start to research it and open that door. And what is it? This just seems unreal. I've got to learn more about it. And they start down that path. And if that process opens the door to their heart, to where they
It's
finally
all
come to the
worth it.
place some of these other ones have come and allow Christ to come in, I'm winning, my Savior's winning. So for me, you know how he tells us he gives us all our own talents, our own things we can do. I've recognized that's kind of what he's tasked me to do, to just use this as a tool, as a way to maybe
Oh, you cut out on us, Curtis.
to maybe get
Oh,
them
you cut
thinking.
out on us there for a second. You just came back. You said what he's charged you to do.
Exactly. Does that make sense? That's why I
Yeah,
do it.
yeah.
I
Sorry, you
do it
just
for
cut
those
out for a
two
few
reasons.
seconds. So I just want
Because I enjoy the heck out of it. I enjoy the science of it, but it also gives me a doorknob to reach out and grab some of these people and just maybe crack the door for their thinking and their science brains to get in gear if they're intellectually honest, and say, what if there's something here that I don't really haven't looked at, and get a book or get something and start to study. And if that brings one person to my Savior, I'm done. I've won.
to. Amen.
Checkmate.
Yeah, I think I told you before, but one of the big things I was like, I'm really excited with this, and like I'm really into like oh, you can't see it, but like J. Warner Wallace. I'm sure you know who J. Warner Wallace is.
That's right,
Like
Shaggy.
yeah, I read his books. I follow him a lot, and so yeah, I'm really interested. Like I personally am like a theology, philosophy kind of guy, like talking to people and doing arguments and stuff. But yeah, there's a whole side of it. Like I couldn't even do like what you guys, what you or like people like Jay Warner Walls, like that approach, like that is just so beyond me. So I love this opportunity to have you on and for you to share and to share it with other people because this is something I could never do. Like this is not in my my gifting at
wheelhouse.
all, you know. So
You
my
know,
wheelhouse.
you know the parable about where Peter gets out of the boat in the storm and he's walking with Christ and he's holding his hand. I kind of see myself like Peter out in the walking on the water in the storm. And you remember what happened to Peter as soon as he started to lose faith? What happened?
It started sinking. Yep.
And that's the way I feel. I know my relationship with Christ, but as soon as I start listening to these rooms about, are you saved? If you're not, if you do this, if you do that, I feel like I'm losing my grip. I'm starting to sink. I go, no, I don't care if you're saved once or you're saved twice. None of that matters to me. It just doesn't. Maybe it should. Maybe people say, oh, you need to study scripture more. I don't, ugh. It doesn't change my relationship with my Savior and what He
Yes.
tells me to do. And I try to listen to Him and how to treat other people and, day to day, how to interact with other people. And after that, it's all just superfluous to me.
Yeah.
It really bothers me how a lot of people draw conclusions before they'll put the effort into researching the topic.
Oh, we
You
have a
know,
great
there's a
word. Tell them your
proverb
word.
about that.
We have
As
a
my
new word
pastor
for
likes
you.
to say.
Ultra crepidarian.
Ultra crepidarian, yeah.
Look it
Were you
up.
here when we shared that
Yeah.
earlier, Michael?
Huh?
The
And you
ultra
call them a bunch of
crepidarian.
ignoramuses.
They're people that try to talk about a subject they know nothing about.
I
Well,
think a
because
lot
I
of
even
people
used
self
what you said to debunk that Yeshua is even black. I'm like, there's been independent studies that have shown in Canaan Jewish cemeteries AB positive blood, and it's AB positive is linked to the Jewish people. So there's no way that Jesus could have been black. So,
Well, and I suspect Scripture would have mentioned it. Maybe not,
right.
but I just suspect what it does say about him is that he was an ordinary looking, I'm paraphrasing, an ordinary looking Middle Eastern man. And that description generally is not black.
Yeah, I just
Right.
want to share this real quick. Proverbs 18, what is it? I just lost it, sorry. Oh, Proverbs 18:13. If one gives an answer before he hears, it's his folly and shame.
got two questions. Bill, is that our Jewish buddy from the very first live stream that I was on?
Thank you,
He's
Mad
not
Dog.
Jewish, but yeah, Josh, yep. Or Everyday Jay. Changed his profile picture, but
I
Yep.
went in one room, Bill, we're off the subject, but we're just talking. We all do it. We skim the rooms. And I'm telling you, they were arguing. They were all Christians, as far as I could tell. They claimed they were arguing about whether you could call him Yeshua or Jesus. And the guy was saying, if you don't call him Yeshua, you're not a Christian. And the
yeah,
room blew up. I mean, it blew up. And I'm thinking, how can you do this to your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ? I have a feeling he doesn't care what you call him. If he knows you're talking to him and you know he's talking to you, I just doubt that's a criteria for salvation. Um,
yeah,
and, and I always thought good news, gospel meant good news, Bill. Maybe I didn't hear it right when I was young, but I always thought gospel meant good news. And I go in so many of these rooms, and I don't have a problem with brothers and sisters discussing different doctrines. And, if they're respectful and
Right.
I don't have a problem with that dialogue. I may not be good at it, but man, some of them, they're just angry and yelling at each other. And I'm like, what do people think that aren't Christians that flip by there? Is this good news? Are you putting a good message out? Maybe I'm missing something, Bill. I don't know.
yeah. That's actually one
It's
of the
just not
reasons
your
I'm on.
message.
I'm on here, and I do what I do is to try to combat that kind of stuff. But,
Yeah, no, you're
yeah.
doing fine, Bill. And I really I can't thank you enough for taking a chance and putting this out for people. And it's really been a pleasure. I enjoy it more than you know. And
Oh,
just
it's awesome, and I gotta admit though, I kind of used a cheat code. I prayed on it first, and God led me here. So,
that's the cheat code. That's right. And you did
so
before
you
we
got a
started.
good word from the big guy. So there
That's
you go.
right. That's right. I look for him for every breath. Um, can I tell you something personal and remarkable? I didn't think I'd go here, but you're talking to someone when they were 18 years old, Bill. my father-in-law and my brother-in-law and I used to go out in the Pacific Ocean rock cod fishing, and we'd throw an anchor out off one of the Channel Islands. They're all private islands. You're not allowed to land on them. And we'd camp overnight and fish some more in the morning, go back over the weekend. Well, one of those weekends, a huge storm blew up really suddenly over the course of from about midnight to 4 a.m. The waves blew up to 20, 25 feet. Our boat took on more water than we could handle, and we sank. And the boat we thought was out in open water. It wasn't. It had blown very close to some cliff face rocks. And as soon as the engine went out, we had taken on too much water. Dad turned the light on because we could hear waves, and it was just a sheer cliff straight into the water. And the boat ended up very quickly smashing into the rocks repeatedly. And we had to get out of it. It was terribly violent, and we were smashed on the rocks, and we were barely able, this is probably 2 a.m., 3 a.m., pitch black. We were barely able to crawl up on this cliff face just a few feet above where the waves were smashing. And we spent the night there huddling in survival mode, switching, putting one person in the middle and the other on the edges, because the winds were 80 knots, 90 knots howling. We were taking salt spray in our face. When the Coast Guard landed the next day on top of the island and threw ropes down over with things to put around our legs, we had salt caked on our face about an inch thick. We had severe hypothermia. We could barely move. We couldn't talk. I was surprised we could even get the slings around our legs, and they hauled us up the cliff face and took us back to a hospital and just warmed us up like hot dogs real slowly. And it was an experience that changed my life in more ways than I can even imagine. You know, a lot of times you're in an accident, a car accident. I'm sure we've all been in a car accident, Bill, and it's over in a second. By the time you're done, you don't even realize what happened. This was completely different. We had to make decision after decision after decision of how to handle what was happening and what was going on, and survival mode on the rocks. And I will tell you, I made deals that night. If you get me through this, I'll be a better person. I'll do better, I promise. And I had been a Christian before that, so it didn't, but it really, and the other thing it did to me is it sunk into me the fragility of life. Everything after that, I knew I shouldn't have survived that night. I knew in my heart none of us should have survived that night, but it told me I had a purpose. And I found out what that purpose, I was very lucky because some people never find their purpose, and I feel bad for them. I knew what my purpose was to honor my God and to develop a family and be the best human I could. And that's what I did, full steam ahead. And as a result of that, it made me so driven in life that I was able to achieve everything. I don't want to sound braggadocious, but everything in my career and my life and my everything that happened. People look at me and they see somebody that's so driven to succeed in every way. I don't just mean financial success, life success, family, kids. Had my kids early. They had kids early. I had my grandkids, almost great grandfather. And it just, I never, you know, people, I hear them having doubts, you know, should I get married? Should I do this? I didn't have any doubts, Bill. For me, it was, I should be gone already. I'm going to run full steam into the wind as fast as I can. I'm an all-American athlete. I've won nationals. I've been in the world championships, and that kind of drive at that level is not common. It takes a tremendous amount of desire and heart and discipline. And for me, it was not even a thought. This is what I'm going to do. This is what, and other people look at that and they don't quite understand, and that's okay. I don't expect them to understand me, but I know it all came from knowing when you've been tried and tested that way through an event that long. And well, anyway, I'm telling you more than I want to share with you, but it just is what made me much of what I am. I wouldn't change the experience. Oh, best part of it, Dad went out and bought another boat, my father-in-law, in about a month, and we sat around and decided what we're going to name it. You know what we named it? Second Try.
Second
And we
try.
went right back out. We got on the boat and we went right back out to that island, and threw our anchor over. And we thought, there's no way this is going to happen twice ever in our life. And I mean, that's really how it's either that or you're scared of the water for the rest of your life, right? So
Right.
we just we just went the other direction. You know, you're just not going to do this to me twice. I know you're not. I got the lesson the first time. I don't need twice. But anyway, I don't even know why I opened that door for you, but it gives you an insight to what makes me
I
tick.
appreciate it.
Uh, I
Oh,
don't share
I have
that too often.
you. Bill's heard this. Bill, you remember
Background, you
this
got
story?
anything else for me? I know I probably wore Bill out. I told you we'd go 60 or 90 minutes, and here we're running two. So it's been fun. I
No
almost
problem.
hate to go, but I think I've worn out my welcome. And if you ever want to do it again, or you read something on the Shroud in the next 6 months or a year, you want to kick me a note, come back in and talk about it. You got me. You know what I'm about, and there you
Yeah,
go.
absolutely. Do you have something, Michael?
Yeah, I had something similar, not near that scary happen. um, Bill, you remember the story about that car accident?
Mhm.
Uh,
It'll
December
change you.
December 17th, I went to go get my wife. I come around the corner of a stop sign, and there was a guy riding a bicycle in the middle of the road with no lights, no reflective material, nothing, all black clothes.
Bam.
No, I went to go around him. Instead of getting in the ditch on his side of the road to avoid an accident, he followed my headlights. So I ended up on the opposite side of the road in the ditch, and I hit a concrete culvert in a driveway doing 45, 50 miles an hour.
Wow. Do you have airbags or no bags on?
Airbags did not go off. I did not have a seatbelt on.
Wow.
I hit it so hard it broke the A-arm that holds the wheel assembly together, and it shoved the wheel up into the the passenger compartment. I should have had my legs crushed.
Right.
It didn't phase the firewall, so my legs were fine. I should have went through the windshield. I remember feeling this like slight pressure against the bottom of my chest, but I did not go through the windshield. I didn't even hit my head on the windshield. I
Wow.
walked away from that accident with 3 little discolored bruises on my 3 middle toes.
And I'll
That
bet the guy on the bike disappeared.
Yeah, he ran off. I've never seen a man run so fast in my
I
life.
know. I know how these go. Like, I'm out of here.
That scared the crap out of me. Oh. But yeah, I
Awesome.
should not have walked away from that, but I did.
Well, thank God you're here.
Oh, final request before I go, Bill. Strictly self-serving, 100%. My grandsons, it impresses the hell out of them that my followers, I think I'm at 96 something, they can't believe it. They call me TikTok grandpa at the dugout at the baseball game. It's just, and I love it because anything you can do when you're my age to impress your grandkids, sign me up because I'm unpredictable. But if any of you listening are inclined, I'd be grateful if you'd follow me. But
Yeah,
again,
definitely follow Curtis. Well,
it is
definitely. I would
strictly
like to.
self-serving to impress my grandkids. So anyway, but I'll pop up in other rooms and I'll talk about other interesting subjects that we haven't touched on at all tonight. I'm very much a Renaissance man. I have a wide range of subjects that I'll speak to, most of them science-based. You won't get me off into theology much.
Oh,
It's not my thing.
yeah, you're welcome back anytime. If you ever wanted to hop up and have something to say about a discussion we're
Pleasure.
having or something, you're always
It
welcome.
truly has been a pleasure, Bill. I feel like I know you pretty well now. If I come up to Washington, I'll send a note and see if we can cross paths and have a
Yeah, I've got
coffee or
family down
beer.
in California, so maybe I'll shoot
I'm in
you.
Central. If you go into Yosemite, I'm your guy.
I've got family in Fairfield, so I don't
Yeah,
know how
that's not
close I
too
is.
far. That's up
Cool.
there, not too far away, right where I went to school. All right, background. Pleasure for your questions, and thank you anybody else in the room for your comments. Really, really fun. It entertains the heck out of me.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Curtis. God
Good
bless
night.
you. Appreciate you. That was awesome.